Hi, and welcome to another episode of the Building Pulse. We appreciate you coming along. Like I am now instructed to try and remind everybody to hit subscribe. And if you're on Spotify or on YouTube or wherever you might be liking this, there's a subscribe button. Go ahead and hit that. Look, today, guys, we've got the honour of catching up with Chris Penk, Minister Chris Penk, who is the Minister of Construction. And I am really interested to hear where he thinks we're at. And in particular, it feels like there's been a lot of announcements, but it's very hard to kind of work out where are we actually at. Is that through? Is it coming through? If it's through, is that it? Is it final? And, you know, what are the implications? But in my perspective, just speaking personally, is I feel like they've taken on some pretty big things that take a long time to actually create effect, and you've got to get them right, but you also need to make sure that they're still open for change as you go. So look, we'll go ahead and bring in Chris Penk and see what he's got to say, and thanks again for joining us. So let's go and bring Chris Penk in. Awesome. Well, thanks for being with us again today. And I know you've been really supportive of a bunch of different events that we've been a part of or I've been to. And yeah, really appreciate your work. And I suppose, give me a little bit of a snapshot. You guys are, you know, what, nearing the end of 2 years of a 3-year term. And the last year gets eaten up with election activity. How do you feel like you guys are going? How do you feel like going? Let's not talk party. Let's talk more about you. How do you feel like you're going? You got into this job, you got this role, and you've got this weird short time frame to try and get stuff done. How do you rank yourself from where you're going? Where did you want to be at this point? Are you there, and are you on track, or where? How are you feeling about it?
Yeah, I mean, I think you can never say you're there because there's always more to do. Certainly, there's a lot that we've been doing, and it's been really busy. And it's amazing how quickly time goes. So there's an element of time flies while you're having fun, I guess. But certainly in the context of a 3-year parliamentary term, and you're right, we're actually already at the 2-year mark. Even though we're not at Christmas, you know, bearing in mind the election will be probably, roughly speaking, this time next year. Clock's really ticking, so certainly lots more to do. We need to keep our foot to the our pedal to the metal, I think is the expression. But in terms of stuff we've talked about, big ticket items, we've talked about all things we need to do, and now in the intervening 12 months, it's just about going ahead and getting them done, which is passing laws, you know, refining some detail, and obviously also getting out there and talking to people about how it's going. Because if it doesn't work well, you know, with the unintended consequences, we'll need to continue to change things up as well.
I mean, the other thing for you guys is you've bitten off some pretty meaty things because you're trying to create, you know, some big substantial change. Have you bitten off more than you can chew, and can you get enough through that is prove some performance, but also, you know, if you don't happen to end up in government next time round, stuff that sticks?
Yeah, really good question. And that's one I've asked myself a lot over the last 2 years. I'm conscious that it's possible to bite off more than you can chew. And what we don't want to do is, you know, a large number of things badly. It would be better to choose 1 or 2 big things and do them well. Having said that, I think part of the challenge is a lot of these questions do sort of connect together a lot. So, I mean, classic one would be, you know, building consent authorities as councils. You know, we need to look at the liability, and in fact, we've announced that we're going to change that so that each player in the game, everyone involved, including councils doing the consenting and inspecting and so on, is only liable for their own share. Well, if you do that without acknowledging the fact that councils, you know, could arguably be consolidating their functions and doing that stuff with other councils, and also the existence of private building consent authorities, then it wouldn't make sense to do that in a fragmented way across different parliamentary terms. So the net result is that there's a lot going on, but hopefully it sort of connects well enough together. And what I would say, because there is a lot of change, and I know that change is hard for business, and including in the construction sector, when we pass laws before the next election, it might be that there's a time that it takes for those to come into effect. So it's not as though the middle of next year signals everything in the world is suddenly different. It's the fact that we've then got the framework in place in terms of the law that Parliament passes, and then we can take our time to implement it as we need.
I suppose the other challenge then when you get into these big shifts that are across multiple bits like you talk about is you guys get screamed at for detail. We want detail. Where's the detail? Because the idea is great, but what does this actually look like? But of course, the bigger the project is, the longer it takes. Where are you at in that scheme of things? Because realistically, we've got, not a lot of time left this year and a month or two next year before you all start going into campaigning mode. Is it enough time to get adequate detail? Or do you get the big rocks in place and things can be tweaked easily later? Or actually tweaking these things is pain in the butt? You may as well get it right in the first place. So a few questions in there. But
no, really good set of questions. I think it's mostly about big rocks. And what that means in terms of passing laws, that's an act of Parliament that has all its different stages and has the opportunity for public input at the select committee process. And that can take, good 6 to 9 months easily, or even more. So I think you choose the big concepts that you need to be locked in law in those ways, and then you can take your time a bit more afterwards. So the example I'd give is we established pretty quickly at the outset that we wanted to have overseas approved building products be able to be used in New Zealand more readily. And your listeners are probably familiar with the detail. And without getting into the weeds, it's about having a credible and comparable jurisdiction overseas that uses certain products and being able to use those easily in New Zealand without jumping through all the usual hoops. And then you go, well, number one, we're going to announce that, and then people will get the overall detail, And yes, they do scream for more, and that's very fair, and it's an understandable and natural reaction. What about this product? What about this country? What will it actually mean in practice? But you have to sort of be bold enough to say, this is the big picture. We're going to do this. Start passing that law, and in the meantime, then you've got the detail being worked through, mostly by MB, but also I'm constantly talking with the sector and hearing their ideas about how we can do this well and safely. And then you fill in that detail as you go. And so it is that, eventually you've got all the different bits ready to go. Because if you try and do everything in one big bang approach at the start and get all the detail nailed down, you'd never get off the starting line and you'd never get anything done. So it's a little bit of operating.
You really have to get it right by the time it goes before Parliament, because, or am I right about this? Because, once it's through making amendments to it, at that detail level, can that be done more easily, or is it, really you got the same kind of process in place? Any amendment to what you've just done is, same process not start again, but, process.
Yeah, you don't want to be changing the primary law, the Building Act, readily. So you do need to get that right first time. But that's why you have as little detail as possible. I know that sounds counterintuitive, maybe even lazy, but actually you want to have just the framework in place, just the big ticket items in that law, and then the regulations and the building code as an example, but also in terms of specifying which building products, just use that as an example again, that can all happen later. And you can add bits. You can just do that almost month by month and have a bit of a rolling ball approach, which is a way to get underway without having to solve all the problems of the world in one hit within a 3-year term.
So if people are seeing kind of what's coming out now and they're going, oh, what about that? Or what about that? There is actually the thing going, bear with us. We need to get the bulk of it through. And we're still all ears, but we can make those tweaks later. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, that's right. But also, you do need the detail, but also people will only really engage in the detail if they know that there's a point in doing so. So the example here would be the proportionate liability, where you say, for years, the sector and various previous government ministers have talked about going to this system. Law Commission's written a couple of very worthy but dull reports on it. Everyone's had a view on it, and we haven't got across the line. But when we decided as a matter of principle we were going to move to that, got a cabinet decision, announced it, I think, alongside the Prime Minister. So it was, basically very clear it was going ahead. Then people said, but what about different types of insurance? What are you going to require? Is there a threshold of the work? And I didn't know that detail, but I could have tried to get that detail before, but people would say, oh, well, are you going to do it? Are you going to go ahead? So it's a bit chicken and egg. You can only really flesh out the detail and the engagement when it's worth people's while to actually do it. Otherwise, the skepticism takes over. Will you actually ever do it, or are we just going to talk about it again like we did 5, 10, 15 years ago?
Yeah. I really like the proportional liability. I think it's heading in the right place. Are the insurance companies now starting to line up, or because that's the risk, right? Is that if the insurance companies don't step up and fill the void, what do we do? Are you starting to get that out of them?
Yeah, I'm having conversations with a few insurers, but also the Insurance Council, just to get an overall view.
Right.
But there are some, policy choices we can make that will, create a really important or less important set of questions around that. I mean, if we're going to make it compulsory, for example, for people to have some kind of insurance from the professionals doing their work, then it becomes crucial, because if there aren't any insurers stepping up, then no one can do any building work, and that's kind of important. But if we say it's voluntary, or maybe something in between, it could be compulsory unless you opt out, or it could be compulsory for residential but not commercial, or it could be, and to be honest, there's a scoop for your podcast, I think the most likely recommendation I'd make to fellow ministers would be to have some sort of compulsion, but be reasonably liberal in terms of what that might look like. So it could be insurance with a capital I, or it could be guarantees as provided at the moment, for example, by certified builders, the Halo scheme, master builders, and there might be other players who are prepared to come into the market as well. So as long as we can say that there's some consumer protection, then maybe that's the thing we do, and insurers are part of it, but not necessarily the whole answer either. Yeah,
I mean, what I like about insurers, one, they're well placed to assess risk and the cost of risk. Two, they can offer a range of options. So it's doesn't have to either be completely insured for every little thing that might go wrong, or nothing. It could be that, or it could be core structure or core things, and then the others you can add to the policy if you want absolute peace of mind that a door handle breaks and that gets covered, or
absolutely. Really great point. Really great point. There's a lot of nuance and a lot of detail. It's not just a black and white thing. Is insurance available or not? Professional indemnity insurance, for example, typically architects and LBP designers, engineers have that, whereas other builders don't, or building professionals don't necessarily. Well, maybe we require it there, but not for the others. And the other good thing about insurers is they're very risk averse, and they've got the same incentives as the rest of us. No one wants poor work that has to be redone. They don't want to pay for it. So their natural risk aversion would say, oh, we don't want to be insuring people who aren't going to do good building work. Great. Well, I mean, I'd love to reform the LBP system and spend some time doing that, and have a greater degree of scrutiny on those who frankly shouldn't hold some kind of license or ticket. But if they're going to do that for us, and then some cowboys end up doing work under supervision, not their own steam, can't sign it off, then that's not a bad result as far as I'm concerned. So, we can use those incentives and market forces to our advantage, I think.
Do you think the insurance companies will be well placed to find where the lines are drawn between all the different liability packages that may be getting insured, in terms of the architect has cover, the builder may then have cover, or has already but may be extended, the homeowner may now have some, perhaps some of the product suppliers at a bigger level, but where those things draw a line, or ensuring that there's not much, if any, overlap, because then you find yourself in a place of litigation, right, between whole lot of pointing fingers. Whereas how do you get that nice and clear? Can you leave that to the insurance companies, or do you think government needs to set that criteria?
I mean, it's tempting to set all the criteria as carefully and as diligently as we can. I guess I'm wary about over-engineering it from the point of view that if we make it too hard or unclear as to whether people comply, then all we're going to do is create a different system of red tape, risk aversion, that's beyond the proportionate, reasonable, balanced approach that we want. So instead of having, councils playing that role because they're the risk of having to pay out every last cent for a defect, instead we shift that elsewhere. So, I think we're going to have some sort of proportionate approach. We won't get it right necessarily in every case, every time, but we've got to think what's going to maximize productivity and also, provide the maximum assurance we can across the board. So, that's a balance. And I guess the only assurance I can provide your listeners, having basically put it forward as an impossible task, to say, well, the only chance we've got of getting it right is if we listen carefully to people who know what they're doing, which is those in the sector, and that's why I'm grateful for the engagement like yourself, because that's the way we can sort of talk through the issues and find out what's needed.
So in terms of proportional liability, where is that in your process in terms of pushing through law?
Yeah, law's being drafted as we speak. So cabinet decision was a couple of months ago. The law gets drafted and then it gets introduced to Parliament. We're intending to introduce it this side of Christmas, which means that it'll be, let's say, roughly speaking, middle of next year that it would pass into law. But as I said before, it might be a period of time before it becomes fully effective, such that the settings take place and we've got insurance and whatever other backup stuff we need by then.
And what about the kind of the opening up? That was one of the first things you had announced around opening up of overseas certifications on building products. Where is that sitting now?
Yeah, well, that's done, in the sense we passed the law to allow it, which included, by the way, that the councils wouldn't be liable if they relied on the overseas, certifications and standards. And then what we've done since then is added a few categories. So plasterboards among them, and then there's a whole heap of plumbing products, from Australia, what's called the watermark regime. And so we're just progressively adding them, and we're adding standards as and when we can. And it's the low risk approach first. The lowest hanging fruit is US, Australian, European standards. So we've gone with that, and then we're looking elsewhere in the world to see where we can safely add as well, because we want the benefit of the policy as much as possible, but also we don't want the loss of confidence, because we end up with some products from a part of the world that doesn't do these things well, and we don't want the negative result, obviously, for particular homeowners or other building owners. But we also don't want a loss of confidence in the system, and then we go back to the bad old days of everything being checked to the nth degree and simply slowing down and adding cost.
Okay, so in some ways that's a good example of something that's got through that you're still able to continue tweaking and adding to as required, which you mentioned at the start. The granny flat 70 square metre or 60-70 system, that was announced pretty early on. Give me a snapshot. Where's that at? I want to know, what's the ultimate goal that we're trying to achieve with it?
The ultimate goal is to make it faster and quicker and easier to build minor dwellings, as they technically known, minor residential units, if you want the full name. But we call them granny flats just because people understand what's going on. Bit of a stimulatory effect in terms of the construction sector. It's some work that can be done much more quickly, readily, but obviously a housing supply issue as well. And that's why it's been attacked from two different ends. One is the resource consent removal, for removing the need for one, which Chris Bishop is doing. And then in terms of the building side of things, as you say, recently passed the law changing the Building Act. It will say you need to do the work in accordance with the building code. You need to be the relevant building professional, LPB, registered electrician, plumber, etc. But by doing that, you don't need a consent. That's passed into law, but it'll be another couple of months yet until it's fully effective, because the regulations to support that aren't yet enforced. So again, it's a staged process, and it would be good to wave a magic wand at the start of the term and it's all good to go. But it does take a while to work through the detail, and also just to bring people with you. Yeah.
So what sort of regulations are still needing to come through in that case?
Yeah, I think the main one really from a building side of things is the new license class for LBP of waterproofing license, I think we're calling it. So there are a lot of level entry showers in granny flats, an older population thing not to trip over. And it was thought that whereas the existing license classes didn't have enough assurance that we would say with confidence that the work would necessarily be done well, such that it doesn't even need to be checked by council and can just be signed off. So just creating that extra class will be able to give the assurance that we need for that. That was part of the feedback came through the public submission process. So that's an example of something that needs to come into effect.
And so what do you need to what do you need to tell council, and what do you need to produce in order to demonstrate that you have built it according to the code? If we're not using a building consent process, what are we using to demonstrate compliance?
Yeah. Well, I mean, what you need to do first is to say to council that we intend to do this, and they're not giving approval or not. They're not giving a consent, but they do have to provide you with a document called a project information memorandum. And these exist already, but they're not really used because there's no particular need to do it. So for your listeners who are familiar with it, some basic information about the property. It's buyer beware kind of stuff. So they're not saying you can't build in an area that's not particularly suitable, but you want to know before you start that there might be an overland flow path or some natural feature or hazard that would make you think twice about doing it.
Right.
And it's also, truth be told, a mechanism for ensuring the council can charge you development contribution, because at the moment that's triggered with the resource consent. And I'd love for granny flats not to have any requirement for that, but then other people who are doing building would end up paying for to subsidise that infrastructure. So unfortunately that's just a public policy choice we've got to make.
So what about on the infrastructure? Can the council still turn around and say, look, sorry, we don't have enough capacity in the infrastructure, be it sewer or water or power or whatever it might be, you can't build?
No. No, they can't say that. And that's the edgy bit of the policy, I guess. We're saying you don't need a consent, and therefore by implication they can't say that we don't have the capacity in our stormwater or our other utilities provision. You're literally just tapping into existing services, and it'll be the odd house here and there has got one. It's a different matter, obviously, from having a whole big new greenfield development or even brownfields where you're filling in quite a lot of gaps. So it's a trade-off for sure, but it's a trade-off to make sure it's a bit quicker, faster and cheaper to build these things. So I guess the other point is that if you've got I don't know, let's say half a dozen people in a single dwelling at the moment, build a granny flat and two of them go and live in that, and you've still got the same 4 inhabitants of the major dwelling, then you're not putting any greater strain on the infrastructure because you've still got the same number of people drinking water or having a shower or flushing the toilet or whatever, just spread out, but within that same parcel of land.
Yeah, although that's the thing, is within 70 square meters you can get bigger and you can get potentially 3 bedrooms in there, a whole other family connecting in, which was part of the objective from the start, was to create more housing in varied ways. So I understand that. So faster, quicker, easier. So before I put a spade in the ground, I've notified council, I've got my PIM, but that's just kind of guidance, isn't it? As opposed
it is. I mean, they will have an opportunity to say, you've got to build only up to 70 square meters, not greater than 1 story, and it's got to be a detached dwelling. So if you say, I intend to do this, here's my plan, and can I have my project information memorandum, they could say, why are you trying to build a 3-story granny flat? There's no such thing. So it's not a consent in the sense of, we like your plans, we don't, as long as the builder and the professionals sign off their work while they're doing it or having done it and provide after the fact. But there'll be an opportunity for council to say, actually, you're not even able to, this isn't what the policy's for. You're not within the parameters.
Right. So you can't put your spade in the ground until you've got your PIM, or you could arguably go start tomorrow and collect that afterwards.
Yeah, that's right. The one grey area for me, and I'm watching this detail carefully, and because I know we've got to get it right, is for off-site manufactured granny flats.
Mm-hmm.
It seems to me that we want people to be able to manufacture granny flats off-site and simply, locate them onto and just drop them in. And technically, we're saying you can't construct until you've got the PIM done. But if you've constructed it and then you get the PIM and then you move it onto site, I think what we have to do is make sure we define carefully that it's construction means effectively moving onto the site or constructing on site. It doesn't stop buying something out of a warehouse that happened to have been done a couple of months before. Sort your PIM.
And then what is there some kind of final sign off or document that you get? You go to sell your house, it's got a minor dwelling on the back. and the buyers all want to know this is compliant, there's no issues. Is there something that you get at that point to certify it, or it's just the
Yeah. Well, the property file would record that, well, in probably the LIM as well, Land Information Memorandum,
Yep.
as opposed to Project Information Memorandum, would record the existence of it because, having done the work, the building professionals would have provided those plans to the council, and that update their records accordingly. I think I'm right in saying that councils will also issue what's called a nominal consent. It'll be basically say this was built, as though it had a building consent, or at least it's not an unconsented work. It's non-consented, but it's not unconsented. It's not illegal. So we don't want people to feel as though there's something wrong with it. It's just a known and acknowledged fact that you didn't need one. So yeah, it'll take a while, I think, for that information or that understanding to filter through to everyone. But
I know that there's a bunch of stuff that's not in your portfolio. So housing and RMA sits with Chris Bishop.
Yeah.
But clearly you got to work together to make some of these work. And in terms of putting the pressure on consenting and that sort of thing, what are some of the key things there? I guess I'm thinking about this concept of councils working together and being able to share resources. You've made the announcement. What is the initial feedback from councils? How far do you think that's going to go?
Yeah, good feedback, and I was hoping it would be, because basically I was responding to the thing that they said that they wanted to do.
Right.
Genuinely went in with an open mind to a consultation that said, that's one option. Another option is basically the same, but throughout New Zealand, drawing lines on a map, consolidating them on regional basis, whether they liked it or not. And you can immediately appreciate between the voluntary and the involuntary one, which one was more attractive. Which is fair, I think, from their point of view. Some of them will have good relationships or be in a part of the country where it makes sense to work together. Others, and Auckland would be, large enough, there's no particular merit in them amalgamating to the north or south. And then the other option was just a single standalone building consent authority for the whole country, do away with all the BCAs in total. And that just, it seems to me quite a good, clean position to land on paper, but it was just going to cost a fortune and take forever to set up. So yeah, so local government gave me their view. I was happy to run with that. So it's been good feedback so far. And there are a few already who I know are actively involved in conversations with their neighbours to try and set up something like this. Hopefully one or two of those get off the ground sooner rather than later, and hopefully they succeed and can demonstrate value for their tax or their ratepayers and their own internal organisations. Because if so, I think others will probably follow in the years that come.
And was this the policy that you were hoping would create less variance between interpretation of the building code between councils?
Yeah, certainly hope it will have an effect in that regard, because I'd heard a lot from the sector that people get frustrated when different interpretations of the same building code apply, according to which council you're dealing with. So hopefully it will help. There are other things we can do in that regard as well, and common IT systems, or even guidelines and practice notes from NB, so that the councils aren't having to reinvent the wheel, which is good for them if that's less resource that they need to expend, but also from the point of view of the sector, being able to say, well, here's a reliable known standard of what's in and what's out. And then there's other innovations as well. I mean, one of them is private building consent authorities. And there is a new BCA that's been established, and that's not to do with the policy I've brought on. That's just something they were already able to do. They just needed to demonstrate that they were able to do it in terms of processes, in terms of financial position, and so forth. So, and to the extent that they end up operating beyond the bounds of a single council jurisdiction in the South Island where they happen to be based, then for people who use their services, that they'll find a consistent application, hopefully, in terms of what they requesting and consents and inspection practices and so on.
But at this stage, it still leaves it pretty open, and it might need either something else or tightening up in order to.
Sure.
What do you think the chances in it? It's more an RMA thing, but I am interested. Obviously, there's this call for Labor to come to the party and support the RMA changes.
Yeah.
And next year's a really bad year to do that, unless you can work it out this year. But is there willingness to compromise on the national side on some things in order to create a more stable framework to put forward going forward?
Yeah, I think there's good appetite for bipartisan agreement now. And yes, next year's election year, but in a 3-year cycle, every year is either election year or the one after, or the one not far from. So I think the incentives actually for both sides now, and I think probably it's fair to say over the years, historically, blue and red alike have been guilty of changing stuff around because the other guys did it. I think we've reached a bit more of a point of maturity now on both sides of the aisle. And so, Chris Bishop's leading that work in terms of particular infrastructure projects in the pipeline that hopefully will be agreed as to be continued, regardless of whether they're halfway through. Well, as long as they're underway. But I think just as importantly is the policy, either in resource management, as you referred to, or even in the building stuff. Something like earthquake-prone building rules, I think are really important, that we don't have Labor and the Greens, for example, on a different page from me when it comes to that stuff, because no one wants on the ballot next year the idea that the investment they're making for a building that lasts 50, 100, 150 years is suddenly going to be changed halfway through. And to give credit where it's due, I've had good engagement with those other parties, and whenever I've announced things, they've always said, yeah, we get the principle, we agree, but we all need to check out the detail and go through that, which is totally fair and reasonable, and actually exactly what they should be doing.
Our industry's shocking for boom bust cycles. There was a sweet point that I thought we'd managed to avoid it, and in our space, and we'll get to innovation soon, but innovation, it's very hard to drive innovation when people are really, really busy or they've got nothing on, and you need that nice little sweet spot. What are your thoughts around what can the government be doing to help smooth out the boom bust cycle? What do you think needs to shift, and what can you guys be doing?
It's probably a few things. One is the big ticket government procurement pieces need to be, I think, more of a staged approach. The bipartisan nature of policy going forward and particular projects, I think, will help as well. If you can think of major hospitals or roads, these are huge investments that come around, once every 10 years or a generation for a particular town or area. So I think we can smooth that out by having an agreement that, the next thing and the next thing and the next thing will take place regardless of the result in the upcoming election. And then you go, well, what are the funding mechanisms as well? And it might be that public-private partnerships, because by their nature, tend to be funded and one model is that they're funded by the outfit doing the work and then paid off by the Crown over a period of time, maybe through tolls if it's the case of a road, or other ways of recovering. And it might be higher rates on residential properties with value capture. So there are ways that you can actually design and fund and plan the projects in a way that leads it to sort of ongoing work taking place. But other than that, a certain amount of it is just macroeconomic environment. If we have the swings and roundabouts of high inflation and then high interest rates to knock that down, of course, that's going to knock around a sector that's funded so much by debt. So, some of it's just good government policy in those other areas as well that will hopefully help if we can, get stable, keep inflation in, and not have any more global pandemics, please.
Yeah. Affordability is a big one, but, your portfolio is limited into what it can do. The things you're trying to do in terms of make things faster, quicker, easier, let products in with checks, all of that. Housing has stabilized. It's not, much to a lot of people's disappointment. It's not taking off like it always has in the past, but in a lot of ways that creates much more stability because the taking off has been problematic, and it's always had to have the water poured on the fire in order to cool it down. What are you seeing? What's your thoughts on where it's sitting and how do you balance a drive to create more houses, increase the quality of the houses, ensure quality products, quality workmanship, all of these things we've been talking about. How do you balance that with housing affordability, which sometimes ultimately comes down to supply and demand? And actually right now, demand's low because cost of finance is high and all those things. Whereas
Yeah, I mean, it's all so interconnected, isn't it? I think you've given a really good explanation of all the different factors. The other one I'd add in there is migration. Obviously, more warm bodies need more housing, if we're talking about residential for a moment. But, equally in terms of school classrooms and health facilities and so on. So it's hard to turn on and off the tap, or at least in terms of New Zealanders immigrating. In terms of immigration, you can change those policy settings and can have as many people in New Zealand next month onwards that you want. But obviously there's got to be a careful approach where, number one, we want people who are going to add to the country, but also, good to have pressure on, or some sort of demand pressure by having people who want housing so that it gets built. But when that gets out of whack, as we saw, a few years ago, for quite a long period of time actually, and that outpaces, then suddenly no one can afford a house anymore, and that's not great either, both politically but more importantly for society. So it's quite hard to keep all these things in balance, but understanding them and trying to smooth out those factors as well as the construction side of things is probably the place we need to get to.
I mean, it does point in some ways to the fragmented nature of politics and breaking things into portfolios when so many things overlap and you actually have to get together with all of those people.
Yeah.
Which is great. Yeah, easy to say to do it, but it's a monster of work.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. But I mean, I don't think there's anything for it but to get alongside those who are, operating in similar kind of areas and make the decisions collectively. I mean, for better or worse, we've got a system of cabinet government in this country. I think it's probably mostly for better, but these decisions are made collectively. So I don't have a bright idea in building and get to past that if someone says, oh, but that's not going to make sense in terms of other things we're doing. As it happens, I've got a couple of related portfolios. One is small business and manufacturing. So I see builders and building supply manufacturers from that angle, as well as thinking about how they're going to fit into the building code and so on. And as Associate Immigration Minister, I talk quite often with the Minister, being Erica Stanford, about a number of people coming to this country, who they are, what they're going to need, what skills they bring and so on. So again, it's all interconnected.
The role of innovation in the building system, from your perspective, what does genuine innovation in New Zealand construction look like? Is it about materials, processes, culture, or is it something bigger in terms of how we think about compliance and risk?
Oh, I think it's all the above. I think it is quite a big picture proposition though. So I think if I had to choose between those different options you've given, and yes, materials and yes, processes and yes, culture are important, but I think the real prize is around where the incentives lie and including liability. For example, what I've talked about is self-certification, and I probably should have called responsible builder policy or something like that, whereby the building professional can be responsible for their own work, both in the sense of acting properly, but also, liable if things don't go well. But the quid pro quo is they're trusted to get on and do it. And I think if you do that, then you go, well, actually, you're going to get more innovation in that approach than if you said, here's a really innovative version of the building code that leans into AI and machine learning and all the new technology, 3D printing, whatever. Because if someone who is responsible for signing off work but no incentive to do so is presented with a new product or system or process, then naturally they're going to be suspicious. But if you can stand by on your home work and you're allowed to do that, then you've got the incentive to innovate because you can do things better, higher quality, more sustainable, more affordable, whatever the thing is.
Yep. You've got your tools, you've got everything you're trying to achieve and do for the country and within these portfolios. What do you need from the construction sector? What do you need if I was sitting here with a room full of builders, architects, developers, engineers, all the like, and you didn't have to worry about politics and we weren't debating whether what you'd done was right or wrong or, negotiating on the details. What do you need as a minister from the industry right now?
I think honestly, it's what I've already had. People have been really generous with their time and insights. It's just talk to me, tell me what you need. Don't sit on a building site or inside a studio doing design and grind your teeth that the system doesn't work or is unproductive, or makes no sense, get in touch, say, here's how we could solve the problem. And people are really constructive. I think it's just something in the DNA of people who make things with their hands, is that they want to put together a better system. And so, if I have any success in this 3-year period, it will be because I've been smart enough to listen to people who know what they're doing. I'm not, I'm not technically qualified in any of this stuff. I've practiced law in some ways that are kind of relevant, but I'm reliant on your listeners and others who are out there doing the work to say what's needed. So yeah, keep it up, please. It's been great.
The only other thing I said, it was last one, but if I quickly ask, the shift from funding from Kaingaroa towards community housing providers, how's that affected you and in terms of your role? And when do we start to see that action so that this project guys can get the tools out for? Because it's taken quite a while, actually. The tap got turned off pretty much right after you came in, and we're 2 years in. Yes, there's a shift, but where are the projects and how far away are they?
Yeah, I think the projects are coming online slowly, but surely. And it was about basically Kaingaroa needing to build houses in places that make sense geographically, but also the right kind and size of housing. There's no point having lots built in the wrong places or for the wrong, family structure of those that need it. And yes, ideally, we wouldn't have seen a single contract changed or delayed or cancelled. But the other big shift is one that we're quite strong on. And this week, by the way, is led by Chris Bishop rather than me. But if he were here, he would say that, we find it really important that community housing providers, as opposed to the state through Kāinga Order, well, it can be either, but it shouldn't be to the exclusion of community housing providers. Do the work of building, but also provide the services. If it's about the people who are going to live in them, and in some cases lives that need support in lots of other ways, not just a roof over their head, important as that is, then actually community housing providers are going to provide better bang for buck. So I think it's a slight illusion if you say, well, what are the number of KO projects before and after? Yes, we do need to make sure we've got a strong pipeline there, but if we can get to a better place in terms of the result for the Kiwis living under those new roofs, then we should do that through community housing providers more than we had in the past.
Very cool. Hey, well, I really appreciate it, mate. Appreciate your work you're doing. I appreciate that you tackled and you recognised that we could do this, but to do that, we need to do that, and therefore we need to do that. And there's no point just doing that. And I think that that's cost you in terms of people's frustration and not seeing things go fast enough because you're trying to do some big shifts, and we're still not at that point, as you say, before people actually get to really see the benefit of it. It's like they're finally just starting to drop. And then they're going, well, okay, but what are the details? How do we practically go and do this? But, that takes courage to do in that way. And I think I appreciate everything you've done and the effort you guys have made in terms of really looking at those big picture things that needed shifting. And I'm really hopeful that they work, and appreciative that that's not the end, that there can continue to be tweaks as required to ensure that the outcomes of, better, faster, cheaper, like you're talking about essentially, or easier, and, all of those things actually flow through. So I look forward to kind of watching the space and seeing things flow through. And hopefully next year is a year of, seeing stuff start to build and seeing some of these shifts really flow through the pipeline, I guess.
That's brilliant. Well, thanks very much for the chance to chat through it all, and also the positive influence that you and others who are, determined to have a better building system in this country. Your efforts are really helpful, and I think we can get to a better place. So, watch the space.
Thanks.
But meantime, thanks for the chance to chat.
We're committed to innovation, and the one thing you've got to watch is, cynicism and pessimism. There's no space for that. If we want to drive innovation, even if I'm completely unhappy with what we're doing, we've still got to find a way to work forward and look for the best, and from all the interactions I've had with you, you have humbly said you're open to impact. I've seen you get asked really pointed, clearly questions, and you don't back away, you don't give a political answer. I think you you answer well, and you're happy to admit you don't know what you don't know, and happy to look at it and change something that needs changing. So yeah, it's great.
Perfect. Thanks very much.
Appreciate it. Well, thanks again for joining us, and again, hit like or subscribe. That was great to have Mr. Penk in. Open to your feedback. I know that he's a politician, and you might not agree with everything he says, and you might not agree with everything that I asked or said. But look, the idea here is to have discussion, always open to your thoughts and feedback, providing it's constructive and helping drive the construction industry towards innovation and changing what we're doing, not harping back to the old, and recognizing that creating change is a hard thing, and it takes a bit of wrestling with it and maybe not getting it perfect, at least to start. So just put that out there. But again, look, we really appreciate you as an audience, and we would love to hear from you, engage with you here at the Hub, and talk about your journey of innovation in your business or whatever it is that you are endeavoring to achieve out there. So thanks again, and we'll catch you on the next one.